Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Product Rising podcast. Today's guest is Andrew Skotzko. I'm so excited to talk to him today. He's an amazing product leadership coach and strategic advisor to tech companies. And he's working on a book related to product strategy and is all around a great guy and a good person to know and talk to about product. So welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks, Cassie. I'm excited to have another conversation with you. They're always so much fun.
I know it's always great to just meet with other product leaders and understand, what people are seeing in the market, and I feel like you have a really unique lens on that too. So I'm really excited to dig into that today. But before we get into all of that, perhaps you can just give us a quick intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career, and then how that led you to becoming a product leadership coach.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like most of us in product, I had kind of a weird path into it. I don't think there is like a default path for most of us anyway. So for me, it all started actually when I first started my career. I was working in what we would now call growth hacking. So very much like quantitatively driven experimental growth marketing. This was sort of like right as that term was coming out, and Sean Ellis was, starting to coin that term and all of that. And I was working at a startup, and I over time was pushing the tools. I was really experimenting aggressively, and I needed the tools to do things they didn't do out of the box. And so I'd been learning to code a little bit on the side and playing with Ruby on Rails and all this, and like getting dangerous, not good. And at some point, I built my own sort of script and whole system to do this really aggressive, like personalized marketing campaign. And our CTO saw it, and he's like, "What the heck? Like, you're in the wrong room. You need to come work for me." And so I sort of was like internally poached is probably too strong of a word, but I basically shifted to engineering in the middle of the startup, learned engineering on the job, did engineering for like 5 years after that. And somewhere in those years of doing engineering, I think when you're a builder, there's just only so many times you can kill yourself working on something and just have it not go anywhere. And it just sucks. It's agonizing. And you're like, wow,
You know what that feels like, Andrew? No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
you've never done that. No, none of us have ever done that. Right? It's like you do that like enough times and you're like, what did I kill myself for? And then you start questioning that. And I was never satisfied with the answers I was getting. And somewhere around there, somebody handed me a copy, the original edition of Inspired by Marty Kagan. I read it. I'm like, yeah, oh my, I didn't even know this was a thing. And so I was like, oh, there's this thing called product. Like then it puts together like my human brain and my technical, like, yes, let's do that. And so that was it for me. And it's just been product ever since. And so since then, I got to work in a lot of different spaces and industries, and ultimately worked as a product leader. And my last operating role, I wrapped up, I guess about 3 years ago now, which is crazy to me. And it'd been a great 5 years in this role. But how I ended up becoming a coach was in my last operating role. I would sort of advise people, just get on calls with people when I had some spare cycles. Like, some friend says like, "Hey, can you talk to so and so?" And I always got great feedback. And people are like, "Hey, why aren't you doing this? Like, why is this just not like your job?" And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting question." And so I ultimately actually burned out as a product leader. Like I just hit the wall. I've been going so hard for so long, and I just had to take a break. Took a step back. I thought it was going to be like a quick vacation between jobs. Turned into a much longer break because I realized how burned out I was, and turned into, actually was fortunate to be able to take like a proper sabbatical for a solid like 6 months. And when I came back to the world, I honestly didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back into an operating role or whatever. And that question that people kept asking me was in the back of my mind. And I was like, well, like, let's give it a go. Let's see if we can pull this off. And so started doing that. And here we are a couple of years later, still going, and it's going pretty well.
That's so great. I mean, there's so many people who have been really successful in their operating roles that are now entering into this world of coaching and
Yep.
strategic advising. And so it's great to hear a little bit more about, what's it like to work with you as a coach and as a strategic advisor? Do you have like a playbook that you use or a specific angle that you're taking when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, sure. I don't know that I would say I have like a cookie cutter playbook. It's you and I have talked about this before, but it's so much of the value of working with somebody like that is that it's totally customized to you. It's like if you just want an off the shelf playbook, there's a lot of great, courses out there and things like that, which are great. So I mean, I think I have a body of principles that I work from, and I have some frameworks I use a lot, but I don't think I would say I have like a step-by-step, paint-by-numbers playbook. But I really try to meet my clients where they are and understand their situation and try to help them win. I mean, ultimately my job is to like help my clients win. And so I try to approach it as both. I'm sort of a weird hybrid of like an executive coach and a strategic advisor, where there's like coaching the craft of product, and then there's coaching the person, the crafts person. And I sort of live right in the overlap of that Venn diagram, where I will, I have training in both those domains. Most of my career is as an operator, but I also have like coach training. And so I can kind of weave between those domains as it supports the person I'm working with. And because you can go so far on like the craft and, oh, I need to know how to do a strategy or like how to coach somebody or whatever it is. But eventually your gains are not there. Your gains are actually more on like the inner game side of things. And so then we'll rotate and go over there and kind of pivot back and forth as it makes sense.
Right. No, I think I really appreciate that. And you mentioned, right, you've got your principles, you have your frameworks, but they're not paint by numbers, right? So much of the value of bringing in a coach is that outside perspective, but not just the random outside perspective. It's like the lens on the situations that you're dealing with that can really be valuable, right? For the people that
Mm-hmm.
bring you on. Can you tell us a little bit more about, a recent story of somebody that's worked with you and what that's been like, and just to kind of demystify a little bit for people that are listening here, that are
Yeah,
curious, like what's it like to hire in a coach?
let's talk about a story. I can't say the company, but I will. Let's call this person. Let's call him Alex. That's not his real name, but we'll just say his name is Alex. And so Alex is he's the CPO for a large company in the energy space, so the energy technology space. And what our work together really focused on when we started was it kind of came in at the strategic level, where they were having a lot of the problems that a lot of people report, where it's like you hear them say things like we're all over the place, like we're doing too many things, like prioritization is a nightmare. Our planning cycles are even more of a nightmare. People, there's lots of stuff happening, but we're not quite sure why, and no one's quite sure what anyone's working on, even though people are obviously doing stuff. Kind of all these classic symptoms of a lack of alignment and strategic clarity. Um, and they work for, they're owned by a larger company, and this larger company holds them to very aggressive performance targets and sort of manages through KPI, not OKR, but like a list of KPIs and like hit these numbers. And so the biggest win that I think we've achieved in our time together so far was coaching him to really lead his leadership team, his executive team, through the mess of, to go on kind of this safari, to basically lead them through the mess of like all the things we might do, to come out at the end of that with an actual strategy that is the clearest and focused they've ever had, where they actually now have the entire company oriented around two pillars that are aimed squarely at the challenge they need to overcome, and everyone is crystal clear about it. And just seeing his growth through that journey was amazing, because going in he was like really nervous and like, I don't know if I could do this, like how the hell are we going to pull this off? And he did it, right? And of course I supported it, like he did it, and it was amazing to watch that. And now it's just opening up the chance to actually do more of the kind of work he wants to be doing.
That's so powerful. I mean, like, I can imagine there's this list of KPIs, and it makes me think of, outputs versus outcomes potentially even. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if it's better with me thinking about it, and to be able to somehow evolve and transform that across the executive team into a focused strategy, two pillars, great. Like must have felt like such a relief for that individual, and to be able to support them through that process.
Yeah, I'm super proud of him. Like he did awesome work, and I tell him every time. He's very humble about it. I'm like, no, you don't understand like what you pulled off here. Like you really need to. You should be celebrating this a lot. This is a big thing, and I think he's
That's
starting to get that, but he's not fully. I have to keep reminding him.
Yeah, well, that's like the in the arena thing, right? You're just in there, so sometimes it's hard to see it when you're
Yeah.
in the arena. What might you be able to share a little bit more around, like, what are a couple of like the major unlocks that happened in that coaching process?
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. For him or with the executive team?
I think like both would be really interesting, to be honest.
Okay. I think I think there was actually two unlocks for him, and that drove what worked for the executive team. Um,
Mhm.
the first unlock was really understanding like what is a strategy actually, and understanding a challenge-based view of strategy, and like, and we can go more into this if you want, of course. But that I think for him was the biggest unlock first, and then I think that enabled him to take a second step, which is the harder step, frankly, which was, okay, I'm not the CEO, but I have to kind of, it's not herding cats, it's herding tigers. Like I have to herd these tigers of these like 7 executives who all have strong personalities and strong opinions and a lot of success and all that. I have to somehow corral these people and get them through the churn and the crunchy, grindy bits. Like it gets nasty in there. Not nasty, it's the wrong word. It gets grindy. Like you're grinding up and metabolizing a lot of stuff. I have to somehow lead them through that. And so I think there was just um, uh, a stepping up to the plate. You know, there's a phrase that I think the British military uses. I believe they call it like, you can tell when an officer, a junior officer has had, they call it like the moment. There's some moment
Mhm.
apparently that in a junior officer, military officer's life, where when they're young and in command of their first unit, they flail for a while, and then eventually they have this moment where people are like pressing them from multiple sides, and they just like something snaps into place, and they go, okay, damn it, I'm going to take command, and they're going to lead this thing, and it's like them seizing, like taking the reins, and you can
Yeah.
tell when someone's had that moment. And I think this is the moment, like different language. I think this is the moment my client had where he just sort of accepted, like, all right, I'm not the CEO, and I'm going to lead this. Like I am going to lead us through this. And that is always like leadership is always an act of faith, a leap of faith. And he made the leap, and he pulled it off. So I think that was the much bigger unlock for him, because beyond that, it's all kind of just details, right? It's like, okay, how do you have a certain conversation? How do you do this meeting? How do you analyze whatever? Lots of details, and there's stuff to talk about there. But like the real unlock was understanding it in the first place, and then frankly the willingness.
Right. Yeah. That's amazing. I think it's amazing. And I'm trying to remember if we had talked about this before, but it was that, when building a strategy takes a long time. You want to do a good, takes investment, research, building your coalitions and everything. But
Yeah.
then the true buy-in process, that might take longer, right? Like that's like,
Yep.
maybe you can share a little bit more about how you think about that with your clients.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a weird way, because strategy is one of these topics that like everybody knows is important, right? Everyone has at some point has gotten that feedback of like, you need to be more strategic, and they gone like, okay, what the hell does that even mean? And so everyone knows that, but then it's kind of somehow still like important but ambiguous, and so that like it's kind of a recipe for anxiety, right? It's a very anxious, anxiety filled space for a lot of people, because they're like, I know this matters and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not even sure what this thing is, so like, what the hell, what do I do? um and so the first part that people then try to deal with is like understanding what is a strategy, and we can talk about that. But I actually think that's the easier part, because I think my view as of now is that as strategists, we almost over rotate into analyst mode, right? We treat this like it's an analytical problem, like an intellectual analytical challenge, which it is, but it's actually in the end much more of a creative challenge. Like good strategy is ultimately a creative designed response to a situation and the challenges that it has. And so you can, like, once you get what is a strategy intellectually, like, okay, that's hard enough. But the really hard part, I think, is realizing that strategy isn't just an intellectual analytical challenge. It's just as much a social, emotional, and creative challenge. And
Mhm.
so to speak to that a little bit, like social is all the alignment stuff, right? You could have the smartest, best analyzed strategy of all time, But if people aren't bought in, it's not going to go anywhere and going to have zero impact, which is how we have loads of documents and loads of companies where they're just gathering dust, metaphorically speaking. So it's a social challenge. It's an emotional challenge because doing strategy well is uncomfortable. It requires saying no, or at least not now, right? The essence of strategy is choice under uncertainty, which is uncomfortable. That's inherently uncomfortable. And so the emotional challenge is really one of like, can you tolerate that? And I've seen a lot of cases where people they get hit a point where they just kind of can't take it anymore. They can't like regulate themselves and tolerate it, and then they kind of punt, and they end up with something nowhere near as good as it could be. And then ultimately is the creative piece, which is like, okay, great. We run our businesses on kind of analytical mode, right? There's like plans and milestones and clock time and deadlines and all that stuff, which is important. And I fully accept that. But really good strategies they're really like an active creative leadership, and creativity doesn't necessarily run on clock time, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
abide by the schedule we would love it to, which is super annoying when you're taking on a creative challenge. So I feel like I'm kind of going a little bit sideways here. So tell me where you'd like to go deeper.
No, I mean, I think that I think it's really helpful to just dig into that, right? Because while there are so many books on strategy, and there's, we can we can read articles, or,
Hmm.
pod, sorry. So while there's so much content out there about strategy, I think you're right. I think it is one of those trigger words for a lot of people that sets them off a little bit into, well, hold on, let me make sure that I can do this well, and understand really what I'm doing. And so being able to unpack the different components of it, I think is really helpful. And
Hmm.
speaking to you, right, because there's the creation, but then that creative, and then the rollout and the buy-in part of it. How many brilliant strategies have been made but maybe never realized, right? I think is a really
Yeah.
interesting question to ask. And so it makes sense then also, like, having somebody that can be that coach alongside the product leader can be really helpful in terms of just providing potentially that encouragement and that alternate perspective along the way. um,
Hmm.
okay, so as a follow-on, when would you advise product leaders to hire a coach? And when might it not be a great idea to hire a coach?
It's a good question with a lot of nuance in it. So let's maybe like look at it. Actually, this is just coming to mind. Let's consider it by stage a little bit, right? So like strategies, a lot of this is stage dependent. So a common case where I see people where I'm like, you would really benefit from a coach is startup founders who don't have a strong product background, and often it's like the CEO leading product, and that person might be from marketing or finance or whatever. And that's a great case for it, where it's like, hey, by default, you're the CPO as well, and if we're really honest about it, like you probably don't know what you're doing, and that's okay, but like you kind of need to get some help there. And so that's a case where I see it help a ton. And then if we sort of go to growth stage, another case where it makes a lot of sense is where it's like, hey, we're growing like crazy, and every CPO I've ever known or VP product in there is like, they are running around like a chicken with their head cut off doing so many things, and they need help to help them build the org, like help me build this shipyard while I'm running it. And having a coach can be really, really helpful in that space, whether for you and or for some of your teams can be incredible, because it's like you just may not have enough hours in the day to give everybody the support that they need to become what you want them to become in your organization. Um, and then whether it's in there or in a larger company, like there's often a thing where people get an opportunity to step into a role like this, and either they haven't had a chance to learn from somebody great before, right? They didn't work under somebody awesome and get to see what that person does and learn from their experience. Um, or there's also a point, like I'm thinking of one of my clients right now, and he said this to me the other day. He's like, you know what my favorite thing about coming to our calls is? I was like, what is it? He's like, you're the only person I can talk to about these things. And this is, I think, a big reason why product leaders hire a product leadership coach, even if they know what they're doing. Because like when you're the most senior product person in the org, who do you talk to about really gnarly product problems? Like your CEO probably is not a product person, so you can't get a lot from them. sometimes you can't talk to the people reporting to you about these things because it might affect them. And so it can be like a super lonely job. And so having a true thought partner who can meet you there is what I hear a lot as a, in addition to like, hey, help me get better at what I'm doing. The other thing I hear a lot is it is incredibly helpful to have a thought partner who can truly be a thought partner, not just like mirror back whatever you said, who can actually push your thinking, improve it. Um, so those are some of the cases that I see, and it's also honestly helpful. Another one of the clients I work with, he said that sometimes they don't. If you're in a leadership role, it can be really vulnerable. Sometimes you don't want to admit you don't know how to do something. Basically, is what I'm saying, right? You may not know how to do something, or you might know you're not that good at it, and you need to be better, and you don't want to admit that inside your company or publicly. And it's like, okay, what do you do? And that's another place where having a coach is really, really helpful. Like that's why a lot of people call me for strategy stuff because they're like, I know it's important. And like, if I'm really honest, I don't really know what I'm doing. So please help. And it's great. Um, Now, as to like when people hire a coach, I mean, if you're in any of those situations and it makes sense to you and you can get budget, like awesome, do it. Um, but I think another one is like, it's really helpful when people have taken a couple swings at something, like they've already tried something, because then they learn it. Like if you just haven't tried anything, um, you often don't learn it as well, right? But if you try something and you struggle with it a little bit, and then you're like, okay, like that didn't work. Why didn't that work? You're so much more primed to really level up and really internalize that growth. Um, I think that's another key piece. Like if people are just like, oh, just tell me what to do, tell me the books to read, like it doesn't. There's got to be a lot of doing here. Like ultimately, you have to embody this stuff. It has to get in you, not just in your head.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think that gets a little bit into just this question around who's the right person to hire a
Mm.
coach as well, right? Like, and I think that ties a little bit into what you were saying. Um, there are people that need to upskill in certain areas, and that's fine. But generally, everybody you're working with is probably like super highly skilled at what they do, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
This is not about, fundamental product training, I don't
Yeah,
believe. So this is just a different kind of unlock and up level for the people that you're working with at a leadership level.
for sure. I mean, I said this to somebody the other day. My clients don't need me. They're already super smart, accomplished, talented individuals. Like they got to where they are for a reason. I'm there to help them expand and win even more and achieve like their own goals and do so with a lot more satisfaction and level up. But they don't need me. I can help them, right?
Mhm.
And we can do even great things together. But like it's not like they're not broken. They don't need me.
Mhm.
You know, that's not what this is. I'm not a mechanic.
So we talked a little bit about, who should hire a coach or who shouldn't and when. Can you tell a little bit more then about when people do hire you? Like, is it typically funded by the organization where they work, or are they doing this on their own independently, and how that looks for your clients?
Yeah, for sure. Most of the time it's funded by the organization. And that to me that makes a lot of sense because that's really what we're working on, right? Like this is not therapy where someone's personal, like they are the personal beneficiary and the primary recipient of value. I mean, ultimately it's really serving the organization. So most of the time it's funded by the business or the company. And sometimes people pay for it. If they can't get funding, they'll pay for it themselves because they're just super committed to growth. They're like, yeah, I just really want to level up and I'm hungry and I'm willing to pay for it out of my own pocket. And they usually don't have to, but that level of commitment says a lot. Yeah. And so sometimes there's that. And then, I mentioned earlier about sometimes it's like, oh, helping a leader of a fast growing thing, like scale up their team. There's, obviously I don't, most coaches are independent, but a lot of us team up with each other when it makes sense. So sometimes I'll refer people in, I'll bring people in, we'll team up on something. But you can kind of think of it as like you've got coaching, training, and consulting, right? And one way you can think about that is like done by me, done with me, and done for me. So consulting is done for me. Like I hire you, you do this thing for me, right? There's going to be deliverables and artifacts and all that stuff. Um, done by me is like, that's more like a course, right? Like, okay, I'm going to read your book and then I'm going to do it myself because that's what I got some knowledge and now I'm going to do it. And that's great. And then done with me is really kind of where things like coaching, and sorry, done by me is also where it's like training would live, right? So you take a course, right? Then you go do it. And then coaching really is in this sort of done with me, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like you have a coach walking alongside you. It's almost like, one way I say it sometimes is like a coach on the field, right? Like I'm on the field with you, like helping you play the game as best as you can. Um,
Mhm.
so that's kind of one way that it often works out. And sometimes, primarily I'm a coach and I work with product leaders, but sometimes when it makes sense myself, or I'll bring in other people to help address some of those other things where, when that makes sense.
That's great. I mean, what a really helpful framework to use. And um, yeah, we've talked to a few coaches here. I think somebody else used a soccer analogy in talking through what
Okay.
it's like, right? So I love the field concept, and I've certainly used like in the boat, right? Like we're
Yep.
rowing as well. So yeah, I think what's just so important is to just say like you don't have to go it alone, right? Like there's
Yeah,
that it's
totally.
a thing. And one, like finding community, I think is really important if you're a product leader. And then having somebody that can help coach specifically in these leadership contexts can be really powerful as well. So through a lot of your product leadership coaching, strategic advising, you're now putting some thoughts together into a book. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how that's coming together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in the what authors dread, which is a rewrite, and so I'm in the middle of rewriting this thing, and I'm hoping I can get this out by the end of the summer. That would be awesome. I'd love to get it out in time for it to support people going into like all the fall planning craziness. So that's coming along, but I would say the core idea is really, I think there's kind of like there's a reframe, there's a framework, and then there's a process. So the reframe is about like what is strategy and like how should I think about it? And then there's a framework for doing so and a process by which you might execute that, take action on that framework. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. Is that useful?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So like let's talk first about the frame, right? So for a lot of people, as we said earlier, like a lot of folks really aren't even sure what this word means. Strategy is like one of those buzzwords that means so many things to so many people that you kind of have to ask, like, what do you mean when you say that word, right? And a lot of people confuse it, or it's treated as synonymous with like a goal, a plan, a mission, execution, OKRs, like lots of these things, but it's not, right? All those things are not what a strategy is. A strategy is an opinionated approach to overcoming the challenges between you and your goal, right? And that's a very generic definition of a strategy that you could take into like anything. That would be true for like a business strategy, finance strategy, a personal growth strategy, whatever. But we're obviously most interested in product here, so it's like, well, what's a product strategy? And for me, product strategy is a series of bets that we make over time to realize the product vision while meeting the needs of the business along the way, right? So that to me is what a product strategy is. And I emphasize the series of bets because we don't have certainty. And the essence of strategy, again, is choice under uncertainty. And like a lot of, I think the big reframe here is that we have fundamentally, not everybody, but like most people and most organizations have kind of fundamentally confused or conflated strategy and planning. So I think a lot of organizations have conflated these two, and they're not the same thing, right? Planning is downstream of strategy. It's shaped by strategy and guided by it, but a plan is prepping you for execution. But planning is when what the symptoms of this that you see that are very common, right, are like we go into these heavyweight annual planning cycles, right? Like if you live in a world where you dread annual planning, you probably are in an organization that has confused strategy and planning. Odds are pretty good.
Mhm.
And so the symptoms of the planning version are like, it's just like endless levels of detail. Everything has to have like 3 digits of precision on it. Planning takes months. And then you look at it and you see, the quote unquote strategy is, very often just a goal, right? Like our strategy is to grow revenue 20%. That is not a strategy. That is a goal. It might be an aspiration, like we want to be the best. Or it's something that is like not even a strategy at all, but sounds like one, like deliver a great customer experience, right? or chasing trend. Like there's a lot of different, and I'm laying all this stuff out in the book. There's a lot of these like kind of common traps that we fall into. But at the root of it all, from what I can see so far from my own experience and like a lot of client work and loads of research, is that we are operating from a false premise, which is
Mm.
the premise of control. Like
Okay.
fundamentally, our business depends on one thing, which is customer choice. And very annoyingly, we do not control what customers do. This whole game would be a lot easier if we could, but we don't. And so it's kind of the same lesson we learned in product discovery over the years, but now up a level at the level of strategy, which is that we don't control customer choice. Customer choice determines everything that happens in our business. And so what do you do about that? Right. And so if you look at like planning, all these things like these really rigorous plans, these 100-page PowerPoints, like it's all acting from this posture of control and assuming that if we just like plan it rigorously enough and you know, this is where you spend like 3 months in a cave, that and then if we just do what the plan says, we're going to win.
Hmm.
But the problem is that when that really rigorous plan hits reality and reality doesn't agree, reality tends to win.
Right.
And
Right.
then you're saddled with all the sunk costs of 3 months of time sunk into this thing, which makes it really, really hard to course correct to deal with like what reality is actually showing you. And so this is where we see, you know, things that happen all over the place where people are on teams doing stuff they know is not going to work because the plan says so.
Hmm.
Right. And like that is such a failure mode. And so that it's this control trap is what I call it. Right. We're caught in this control trap and we need another way. And so that's where I'm like, okay, well, what might it be instead? And this is the book I'm writing, which is that instead of like operating from a stance of control, instead you have to shift your posture and live in bets. Right. This is all a series and a cycle of bets, and you got to live in those bets. You got to choose your bets, you got to place your bets, you got to run and track and monitor your bets, and then you have to adjust your bets, right? Because the game and the market is changing all the time. And so it's a cycle, right? And so the big shift here is moving from this like very occasional, discrete, heavyweight planning exercise to living it as a living, breathing, adaptive cycle of betting. So
Yeah.
that's I feel like I just talked at you for a couple minutes. So let me just pause there and see where you want to go with.
Okay, great. Um, wow, no, that was a really helpful recap of your POV on strategy. I can imagine that a lot of our listeners are nodding along. They're like, yeah, I've felt that way before as well. And you know, getting into the concept of bets, right? That for me is like hypothesis driven strategy and getting
Yep,
playful with it.
totally.
Which, you know, that then begs a couple of questions for me. So the first question is then how, like, what's the relationship between a product strategy and a business strategy when you're working with your clients and they have to think about this? Here's what I have as a product strategy. They also have to set it in the broader context too. So like, how do you coach people around?
Absolutely. Yeah, ultimately, let's just get clear on what the difference is, and then we talk about like what do you do about that. So, what is the difference between a product strategy, a business strategy, a fill in the blank strategy? So, let's go from sort of abstract to specific, or more general to specific. So, a strategy in the generic sense is a flexible, opinionated approach to achieving a goal, and doing so requires overcoming obstacles. Right? That's strategy in general about any kind. So then a business strategy is the approach for the business to win in its market or markets of choice, right? And most of the really good, like there's a lot of really good material out there on business strategy, like some excellent material. So and it's probably all the books that your listeners have been recommended when they start asking. You know, it's Richard Rummelt, it's Roger Martin, it's Michael Porter. Those are amazing. And you should absolutely read them. But those are really about business strategy or often corporate strategy. And so you're often left with like, okay, so how do I like that was cool, but what do I do with that as a product leader? And so that's kind of where I'm trying to fill a gap. But product strategy then is the approach for it's a series of bets for the product to realize the product vision and meet the needs of the business along the way. So that means it is ultimately supporting and driving the business strategy. So what do you do about that? I mean, first thing is like, if you have to come up with a strategy as a product leader, a product strategy, that is, first thing you should do is like ask if there's a business strategy, and hopefully there is one. I mean, often there is not, sadly, but if there is, get it and read it and understand it. That would be step one, because like that is what the business leadership has decided and aligned on, is what we're trying to do as a business, and that the product needs to roll up to that, support that, etc. And in I don't in product companies, and I don't mean like product led growth. I mean like a business that is primarily makes its money from selling products, not services or whatever else, where the whole business is ultimately all the different functions are around a product and bringing that into the world. There's a huge overlap between the product strategy and the business strategy. Like if you're in a small SaaS startup, they're effectively the same thing. So that's kind of how they relate to each other. And I think the first thing that if you're trying to come up with a product strategy, you need to get clarity. What's one of the pieces of doing it? You need to get clarity on the business goals and strategy. Very often there isn't one. And so that's kind of like the client I was talking about earlier, where he had to herd the tigers. Like that was a problem. There was no real business strategy. And so that was hard. And so that whole two pillars thing was the business strategy layer. And then from that, we could then really do a good product strategy. So that's kind of how I think about them playing together, but you ultimately need both.
I mean, really powerful stuff to think about. Having that really synergistic relationship between the product and then the go-to-market, right, is so important, because if that isn't in sync, then it's a recipe for disaster. So, and the other piece that I think is interesting, where you talked about if you're an early stage startup, right? So, it's almost like if you're pre-product market fit, your product strategy is your business strategy, because you don't have a business, you have the right products. And then even if you're like just, approaching product market fit and then figuring out the next level, I mean, really product is still the foundation of a lot of that. And then of course, as then you're scaling and your commercialization strategies like grow and grow, then maybe they diverge a little bit more. But I haven't really thought about strategy in that way before.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it, in that when you're in 0 to 1 territory versus later on, whether that's 1 to 10 or 10 to 100, is like, strategy, like I said, it's an opinionated approach to achieving a goal, right? So what's the goal? And so this is where you really need clarity from the business of like, if you're in a more established thing that's growing, or even a late stage, it might be like market expansion, it might be moving up or down market, it could be any number of things. But if you're in 0 to 1 startup territory, like the only goal that matters is achieving product market fit. So that is your company goal. And then you're like, that's what the company needs. And then your product strategy is like, okay, great. What is your approach to achieving product market fit? Which goes like right to the what I think of as the strategy core, which is really about positioning, segmentation, and differentiation, which are wildly overlooked in most strategies.
Right. One of the other things that you spoke about was how there's strategic planning, right? And those things kind of just together. And I've been at an organization where October rolls around, maybe it's September, and it's like, oh wait, the CFO wants the annual plan for next year, so we need to define who the teams are and what our hiring is going to be. So therefore, we need to know what our strategy is. And so then all of a sudden, it's like this cycle that's being run. Whereas like ultimately, if you have a hypothesis driven strategy, that's a series of bets, then that's like an ongoing process, I think. Right. So, have you coached people through, I'm just trying to think of my own experience. Have you coached people through how to like maybe detach those two or parallel path them in a way that,
this is
the business, while also giving the product leader room to do the good work of strategy?
You're asking the right question. This is really at the heart of the matter. So I love where you're going with this. Yes, is the short answer. I've definitely worked on this. So yeah, I have to comment really quickly on the strategic planning. I literally, I was getting a little salty in one of my drafts, and I think my section title was literally strategic planning isn't. Like it's not strategic, right? Because one of the best people to look at him is Roger Martin, who wrote Playing to Win, amazing business strategy book. Like he's got some amazing stuff on this. And it was actually reading that gave me like helped me see this originally. I was like, oh, right. Okay, we've fundamentally confused these. Anyway, so what do you do about that? Right. So you have this annual planning process, right? It's this once a year heavyweight, the deadlines are coming, we got to set the budgets, yada yada yada. What do you do about that? And considering that we would probably like to live in a world as product leaders where we got to do the ongoing good work, like you were saying, of the hypothesis driven, the series of bets, living in bets, like that whole idea. This is exactly the question I've been trying to solve for a long time now. It's a little bit of the glib answer is you kind of have to do both. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that like you have to give you do have to play ball with the business in the planning cycle, right? And so, I mean, the first answer is like you should have started 3 months ago, and next year start earlier. So ideally, you start ahead of time, right? If your planning cycle kicks off in like September, like you should probably start on this in like May or June, so you can actually have the time to do the real work, because it does take real time and effort. Like it takes time to your mind has to percolate and stew on this stuff to find the insights. So here's what I see as the crux of this problem. We talked about the control trap earlier. Here's what I think how it plays out. So if you accept the premise that a strategy is ultimately it's a creative challenge and an act of creative leadership, that means it's in the domain of creativity, not the domain of planning. And this is why, if, for example, people have probably read Marty Kagan. He talks about like what's the raw material that strategies are built on. It's insights, right? Like it's these real deep insights into the nature of something that's where really strong strategies come from. Well, guess what? The really annoying thing about insights is we can't force them. They operate in the domain of creativity. Like creative insight runs on its own schedule, not the one you prefer. And so I don't want to go too deep into the research, but there's actually a distinction here in the research around time and our relationship to it. And it's the difference between what we call clock time and event time. So clock time is like planning. It's what you see when you look at your calendar. Event time, which I'm going to call creative time, is the things that run on their own schedule, right? You don't actually have control. You have influence and you can participate, but you cannot force the insights, the aha. You never know when they're going to show up. And so now we've arrived, I believe, at the crux of the problem, practically speaking. So my strategy to be a good one depends on insights, which run on a schedule I don't control. And yet I have to give something to the business 3 weeks from now because we have to budget and all that stuff. So this is I see it as the crux of the problem from a practical perspective. So what do you do? This is how I understand the question you've asked. Is this what you're pointing at?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So what you do is, if you don't already have a strategy, is you come up with a sketch of a strategy as fast as possible, right? And you start hammering on that thing with a bunch of people, right? And so strategy, even when you do have time for it, strategy should be a team sport, like a small team. I like to see a cross-functional group of like 3, maybe 4, really doing the deep work. And so you assemble that team and you do it as fast, do a cut of this as fast as you can, and you put a bunch of caveats on it, right? So you know that like, hey, you need to always have a working strategy when people ask you, but you need to also not position it in such a way that you can't course correct later. So yes, you need to come up with a strategy, but shorten your timelines, add like qualifiers and confidence levels on it where you're like, okay, like this is what we're pursuing for now. And then you're buying yourself the ability to course correct based on that data. So you can frame it in hypotheses like you did, right? You can say like, okay, here's the 3 big bets we're making next quarter. And this is what I'm 80% sure will be the quarter after that. And then here's my big ideas for H2. And you put like confidence ratings on these things. You say like, okay, I'm very confident about next quarter. I'm a little less confident the one after that. By H2, I'm really not so sure. But again, this is not the end of it, because you're going to come back at the end of this next quarter and you're going to make it better. You're going to be smarter in a quarter than you are today. So you come back and you improve it, and that buys you time. So it's like you have to play ball enough to get through that gauntlet, but don't paint yourself into a corner, basically, right? If you cannot in good faith promise everything you're going to deliver 10 months from now on the specific date, like that's bullshit. And we all know it, so don't do it. But you do have to have something, right? So you have to give them something, but then buy yourself the time to go do that like cycle of work. And I'm okay with this on the major condition that you actually step into working on this as a cycle. Like you have to step out of the root of the problem, which is I only work on this like once a year, and starting to like this is an ongoing forever thing that's always adapting and growing and getting smarter and better. If you do that, you can this play works. If you're
Right.
not going to keep working on it, you just screwed yourself.
So it's like, okay, here's Q1, Q2, H2, or it could be here's QX plus one, right? So you're
Mm-hmm.
like not like literally thinking of the year, but you're just thinking, okay, I have X amount of confidence in this upcoming quarter. It's decreasing over
Mm-hmm.
quarters, but I build that up as I'm doing the research over time, and I'm recommitting each quarter, for example, to a
Yeah.
different strategy. And so I think it's so important for product leaders to learn how to carve out the room to do that. And I love your approach you
Yeah.
just outlined because it does just that versus like, oh, I need to know what your strategy is for 2025. And then it just turns into this big story of what you're going to be doing over the course of the year. And really the work is about like what you're doing to increase your learning and confidence over the quarter and leaning into that for the following one, for example.
Yeah, I mean, when the CFO or a CEO or whatever asks you for that, they want to know that you have a like that you have a credible, informed, like a real opinion based on something about where you're taking this product and why and how it's going to help the business get where it wants to go. You
Mm-hmm.
can do that without like you don't have to be an oracle to do that. When I say oracle, I mean like foresight, not the company. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like you don't have to be able to predict the future to do that. But you do need to have something so that you actually have an answer that builds confidence. Because the and by the way, like this is obviously the situation that a lot of people find themselves in. It's not ideal, but it is real, so we have to deal with it. Ideally, you start earlier so that the answer you give when they ask is better and you feel better about it. But either way, like do the cycle, work on it on an ongoing basis. So, ultimately, we want to have a strategy that is clear, credible, convincing, and consistently used. Right. That's like a good four things to achieve. But it starts with clarity. And so what you can do is like, yes, you may not have the time right now to like I supported somebody in this last fall, right? And they were in a company that's doing very well, strong product company. And we got on the call and she's like, I was like, okay, how long do we have? Like, I'm like, it's September something. Like, how long do we have? She's like, I have 12 days. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, what happens in 12 days? Oh, there's a board meeting. Okay, great. So here we go. And so it was like, all right, well, we're going to come up with something as good as we can in 12 days and be honest with ourselves that like it's not as good as it should be and we're going to keep working on it. But we got to have an answer in 12 days, so let's come up with it. So in 12 days you can come up with something that's clear, that's credible. When I say credible, I mean it's rooted in insights and data and evidence. You're not just making this up out of nowhere. Um, it can be how compelling it is or convincing will depend on your audience and what they need to see to convince them. And then consistently used is actually more of a later problem of after alignment and operationalizing it, right? But you can come up with something, and then you can keep working on it because otherwise, what you have to avoid is one of the biggest traps in this whole game. And this is a trap that people often fall into when they first take this really seriously and they really sincerely try to do it well, right? They finally hit that point where they're like, all right, damn it, I need to learn this stuff. I'm going to go read those books. I'm going to go read Porter. I'm going to go read Rummelt and whatever. And then what the trap a lot of people fall into right there is because they just got this download of epic theory, which is really great. But the trap they fall into is they go into a cave. And like you have like you have to stay out of the strategy cave. Like if you go into a cave and what this looks like, what this sounds like is, oh yeah, it's coming. I promise the strategy is coming. I promise. And then they ask you again, no, it's coming. We're working on it. Every time that happens, you are losing and you're chipping away at the effectiveness of your strategy. And so like you've got to stay out of the strategy cave. Instead, what you got to do is like you build a sketch and you get it as good as you can in the time that you have. And as you're doing that, you do it with a team that's cross-functional. So you have some like go-to-market support in there. You've got some engineering in there, something like that. And you bring this is also part of how you solve the alignment challenge is you don't wait for alignment at the end, you bring them along for the ride.
Mhm.
So at the end, it's like a rubber stamp because you've already had all the conversations. So you bring
Mhm.
them along for the ride, and then you move forward, and but then you have to keep working on this thing.
I'm literally thinking of a cave and then the tigers that you have to herd, like standing
Yeah,
outside the cave.
and they're waiting for you to come out of the cave, and they're like going to tear you
Hit
apart
the
if you don't come out with
tigers so
something
that
good.
they'll follow me. Yeah, instead of having them. Yeah. And also just that idea, right? And I forget the exact quote, but the work will fill the space or the work will fill the time,
Yeah.
right? So there
Yep.
is really cool about time boxing your amount of time to build a strategy. Maybe 12 days is a little bit abbreviated,
It's
but
a bit
then I think
aggressive.
that just leans into the idea that it's a series of bets and you have confidence levels on those that you iterate through intentional research. And like your strategy is actually, oh,
Yeah.
we're learning about when we brought this to market with this ICP, this is what the response was, or whatever the feedback loops are that you need in order to then inform what you're doing. So
Yeah, like
um
if you're feeling the pressure, like a lot, it's very, very easy. Like the strategy cave thing is perfectionism. It's a perfectionistic like fear response. We're really afraid of getting it wrong. So we try to go make it perfect and pray that when we come back, we nail it. That is totally a failure mode. You're 95% of the time, that's not going to work. Once in a while, you get lucky. But don't do it. And so, but the reason that if you're doing that, it means you're still inside the control trap. You're still operating from this like planning centric, occasional once a year view of the world where you have to get it perfect because you've got 18 months riding on this thing or 12 months riding on it. But if you actually shift to the other way where you're like, hey, I'm going to be like working on this like forever and we're going to make it better 12 weeks from now and because we're going to be smarter, you don't have to get it perfect up front because you
right.
can make it better, right? You can ship like I'm not going to use the word minimum viable strategy. I hate that, but like you could ship a thing and then make it better because you don't have just one shot at this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I mean then I'm thinking of like the CFO tiger, the CEO or the CRO tiger. But they're, if you can just bring them into partnership with you in these things,
Yeah.
then that's more powerful, right? Like, hey, we're going to get a nimble team. I need to fund it. This is what we're expecting. And if we see this response, we need to scale it to this. And if we see this response, we might redirect those resources here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like just to
Yep.
show if this, then that thinking so that it's not like, oh, we've just asked for $5 million to fund this initiative. And then all of a sudden it's like that, it just feels like this big finite thing. Of
Mm-hmm.
course you need to have confidence in that if you're requesting the money, but to show that iterative strategic thinking, I think is
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Or even with a CRO, right? Like, hey, we did this and then this was the response we got, or I'm going to need to partner with you to get these kinds of feedback loops so that we can increase our confidence from 50 to 90% and by
Yeah.
H2. And then that informs his strategy or her strategy. So
Exactly. Right. And that's why I love having that strategy squad be like a small group that is cross-functional. And I love it if it's like the head of product, the CRO, and the CTO.
yeah,
Something like that is awesome.
yeah,
Like because then and then if you do that and you work on it together, guess what? You just hit like you just solved almost all your alignment problems along the way.
yeah. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you about all of this, especially the strategy stuff. I think it's really, I mean,
It's a
just
lot of fun.
to share, like you said that somebody reached out to you with 12 days to finalize her strategy and present it to the board. Like, let's just put any listeners out there that are in similar situations, like you have a tool that you can reach out, which is like you can kind of figure out if you want to bring on a coach to support and augment in those kind of situations, whether it's in 12 days or a month.
Yes, and what I'll say is like I don't know when this podcast is releasing, but we're recording in the spring. Like by the time you're hearing this, if it's still in like the spring or early summer, start now. Like
Yes.
start now.
Start now. That strategic planning quarter happening in September and October really does sneak up on you, and it should be ongoing, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, like if you take nothing else away from this about strategy, it's that stop doing it like once a year and just start like embrace it as an ongoing cycle of bets and work on it in an ongoing cycle, just like you develop software. Develop your
yeah.
strategy like you should develop your software. in an ongoing cycle of iteration and adaptation. If you do nothing else, that will get you on the right track.
Yeah, love it. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Andrew. I really appreciate your time and your insights, and we'll make sure we put all of the resources in the notes for the show here, and have a great day.
Thanks, Cassie. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
This podcast is an original production of Women in Product. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the Women in Product YouTube channel. Leave us a review so that others can discover us, or share this episode with someone you know. Original music provided by Jimmy Hahn. Thanks for joining us.